Alright, so this is the version that I worked on to bulk up the torso as well as the legs so that it's somewhat distinguishable from the original version. I also added a skin shader, so we could use that as our base paint layer. I'm now ready to bake. I already have my UVs set up, but if I wanted to auto UV, I would go to the UV section here, and you can choose to auto seams, then unwrap, or just auto map. Another option is during the bake process, we'll have an option that I'll point to here shortly that will let us choose auto mapping at that stage as well. Also, if you happen to have multiple objects in the scene, make sure to name your voxel object and its corresponding retopo mesh the same, because 3D Coat uses what's called name correspondence in order to utilize a sequential texture baking tool set. Let's say, for example, if you have a body voxel object and a retopo mesh, a shirt voxel object and retopo mesh, and a pair of pants, again, voxel object and retopo mesh, 3D Coat will look for the name and correspondence of each voxel object, and it will bake it with its corresponding retopo mesh individually, but in a sequence. Again, just check that when you want to use it. Leave it unchecked if you don't. In this case, I don't. So I'm going to proceed down here to bake with normal map or per pixel painting. We'll see a bake skin settings dialog. You can preview your inner shell and your outer shell. The outer shell, you just want to make sure none of your voxel object is poking through. Oftentimes you might see, in the armpit region, as well as, the back of the legs, or where it's really low poly, you might see some poking through. You can also make adjustments with your brush here. This pulls along the normals, so keep that in mind. When you're working on the outer shell, your normals are pointing outwardly. When you're working on the inner shell, your normals are pointing inwardly. You can invert it by selecting this or holding down the control key while this is still active. You can relax with this brush and then flatten with this one if you need. All right, so again, you can adjust the sliders here. I'm going to leave them because I've already adjusted it. I'll hit OK. Then you can decide in this dialog what type of normal map preset you want to use and whether or not you want to subdivide it when it sends a copy of this mesh into the Paint workspace. Where that's most useful is if you think you might need to use the sculpting tools or the transform tools in the tweak room. If your model is too low poly, it's not going to be that effective, just depending on what you're doing. But if you know you're not going to use it, then there's no reason to add subdivision here. Keep UV, that should be the default action if you have UVs here, and again, you can auto map if you need. And I'll leave the texture map size at its default 2K here, but you could go above that if you need. I'll hit OK. So while it's baking that, I just want to mention you have a mirrored set of UV tools here in the Retopo workspace for when you're working on Retopo meshes. The UV room is strictly for paint objects, meaning things that are imported into the Paint workspace and they are ready for texture painting. Okay, so it looks like we're done and we can step into the Paint workspace now. Generally, you will see your voxel object and your paint object taking up the same workspace. There are two ways that we can go about hiding the voxel object. We can do that from the Vox Tree Layer panel, or from the View menu, uncheck Show Voxels in Paint Room. We can do a little bit of texture painting if we want. I want to create a new layer. Let's undo that. And I want to disable depth and roughness and paint with just color. Actually, my opacity is down to 27. Let's go back up to 100. And I can hit the delete key to clear that from the layer. And I think we are ready to export now. Let's go to the File menu, Export to Modo, and I'm going to point back to this Applinks folder, the one that's in the Applink panel. Wherever it's pointed to, that's where I want to direct this. So I will point to that one. We have a Modo physical preset. And if I had a subdivided version in the Paint workspace, I can export out to the original low polygon version that's in the Retopo workspace. I'll hit OK. All right, now let's go back to Modo. And I'm just going to go with a blank scene instead of the one that had the original meshes. Here in the Applink panel, the section that I want to be concerned with is the re-import to Modo section. I want to make sure to check both of these because we are importing both our texture and our mesh. I would choose add as a new mesh item, but if we're replacing a mesh, we would choose that here. And also mode, update all materials or as per material. And then you can choose whichever option here applies. So I'll stick with advanced material. And then click pool. Okay. So really that's about it. I just wanted to do a quick walkthrough. However, I'm going to make one slight adjustment here in the shading tree. So let's say the body, the normal maps always seem to be a bit fussy coming from 3D Coat. In this case, I'm just switching the color space for the normal maps to default for each material. Hit tab to smooth. All right, so there we have it. And that's a quick rundown of the 3D Coat Applink plugin for Modo as it relates to exporting from Modo into 3D Coat and then getting our model back. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.